welcome to this episode of the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about some characteristics of mentally tough tennis players and mentally tough athletes in general. The way that Brian and I have sort of a different take on this topic in terms of how we start to break down some of these key characteristics and key attributes. But yeah, Brian, I guess in terms of how we start, is there a certain a certain way that you start to break down your list in terms of what makes certain tennis players more mentally tough or able to, compete at a higher level day in, day out?
Yeah, I think, when I think of attributes of mental toughness or even whether they're character traits or behaviors, I think we're going to probably lump a lot of that all together. I do think of a certain level, and I'm going to go over probably four or five, and I may put a couple together. It's kind of to blend them to show a bit of a continuum there. But I do believe that there are certain, and there are probably more attributes, Josh, than what we're going to talk about. There's
Mhm.
a famous study from the early 2000s. The name escapes me, but it was something like, what is this thing called mental toughness? And in there, the idea of the study was to survey elite athletes and ask them what they thought were the most important attributes of mental toughness. And they came up with about 12 different ones. Not all of them, were at the same level of priority and importance. So, I think you and I are coming at this with maybe 4 to 5. There are probably more, but I think I'd rate these at the highest level. And so I'm going to start with what I think is, for me, what I've experienced and what I've observed, I think is one of the more important attributes, which is respect, and really more about respect for others. And I like to break this down into different categories of respect and for whom. Because a lot of times when you talk to people about respect, they leave off one audience, and that is the opponent. They'll very often talk about having respect for coaches, respect for maybe family or parents, respect for the game. I would also say we need to throw in respect for facilities, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But respect for opponents is really important, and because I guess the opposite of that is thinking you should win, think you will win. And we've all said it. We've all said, oh, I should win this match, or we've probably said to some of our teammates, oh, you should win that match. And that statement can often be quite dangerous, because as soon as you say it, or as soon as someone says it to you, what happens is expectations are now increased. And, as we know from one of our previous episodes when we talked about Iga Swiatek, we want to try to keep expectations low, but our standards high. And so we want to make sure that when we're going into any match, we understand that we have to give our best effort. So one of the things I like to work on with players is a formula that I have derived from watching a lot of pre-match interviews. And you'll see this from almost any player, any top player, when they're asked about an upcoming match. And so the formula falls into three parts, Josh. So the first thing that these players do, and they may not fall in this order, but it will come out in the interview, is every top player almost always says something nice about the opponent.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So they might say, hey, so and so is playing with a lot of confidence. He had a good week last week, or something like that. Right. So they'll always say something nice about the opponent. And we can always do that, no matter who we're playing. We can even just say, hey, that person fights, or they always give their best effort, whatever it is. So we can start off our thinking about a match, with that. The next thing they do after they say something about their opponent, they bring it back to themselves, and then they say something positive about their own game. It's like, but you know what? I'm playing well too. I'm feeling confident in my game. I've been having some good practice sessions this week. My energy is good, etc. Right? So you say something nice. And then the last piece is you bring it back to something that you can control and maybe have a good perspective of something like, the match starts from 0 we'll see where it goes, but I'm going to go try to play my best, give my best effort, and at the end of the day, we'll see what happens out there. And through that formula, now what you're doing is you're taking it about, you know, saying something positive about the other player, positive about yourself, but then bringing it back to something you can control. And if you watch most pre-match interviews, you're going to see some flavor of this, right? Would you agree, Josh?
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great way to break it down. I think of Nadal in terms of how he often is so generous in crediting his opponents,
Yeah.
talking about how well they've been playing, and talking about how if he even wants to have any sort of chance in this upcoming match, he needs to play his absolute best and fight every point. So that piece that you're talking about something you can control, he'll often bring it back to performing at a high level, point in, point out, and not overlooking anybody, taking every opponent seriously. So I think that's a great point. To me, and this is certainly something that happens maybe in the tunnel leading up to a match. If ESPN or whoever, Tennis Channel, whoever interviews a player, and they're talking to the camera, they're talking to the fans, but I would say they're also talking to themselves to a certain extent. It's, hey, I'm respecting my opponent. I'm taking this opponent seriously. I don't want to overlook anybody. If I overlook this upcoming opponent, and I think maybe some in our audience have had this experience, when you overlook somebody and you don't give them that respect or that seriousness that they deserve, then you're not going to be mentally ready when they start to fight back, when they start to play well. So I think each of those three pieces are as more than anything talking to themselves. Say, hey, let's focus on what we can control here. I have a lot to offer, but so does my opponent. Let's focus on really what I've been working on day in, day out, and let's be the best possible competitor I can be. So I really like that breakdown.
Yeah, and I think if you're a coach or even a sports psych professional, you could practice this interview technique. And pretend you're Darren Cahill from ESPN, and you ask your student or player what he or she thinks about today's match,
Yep.
and have them use this formula to talk about it. And then, as you said, talk to themselves that way, you know, in the lead up to the match, whether that's a few days before or the day of, that type of thing. Um, because even if there is a matchup, let's say, where it's very lopsided, and you're the one who is the better player, um, what kind of message does it send if you go out there and you're sort of joking around and not giving your best effort, clearly not respecting the other opponent? And I had this situation with a couple of college teams, um, where this happened. Actually, there were like three teams involved, sort of one team in the middle that had played a team that was much worse than them, and then played a team that was much better than them. And what ended up happening is that team in the middle, they disrespected the team below them, saying they were so bad. And then, of course, because of that, they didn't play very well. And
Right.
then they played the team above them, and the team above them said they were so bad. I was like, all right, how's that feel? Right? There's always going to be somebody better, right? So as soon as you start treating somebody like they're lesser than you, well, realize that how does that feel if somebody did that to you? So we want to be aware of that. So I think really after we talk about the opponent in this way, the best way to show respect for your opponent is to give them your best effort, even if it is a lopsided thing, because now you're showing them a little bit about how it should be done. What professionalism looks like from a good player, and you end up probably winning more efficiently that way as well. So I'll go through the rest of the respect stuff a little bit more quickly, but I thought that's, to me, that's when we're talking about mentally tough competitors in the sport of tennis, we really have to foster much more of a respect for the opponents. I think, when it comes to respecting coaches, it's about listening to what they say, looking them in the eye. It's if they ask you to try something, you do it wholeheartedly. And again, giving your best effort is probably a way of showing respect for everybody out there. The same with, teammates, parents, friends, family, giving your best effort, being grateful for their presence in your life. Um, from a facility perspective, I think this is a really important one, especially with college teams, because sometimes college teams come in and they're kind of like a tornado. They leave a lot of stuff around. There should be an attitude of leaving it nicer than you found it.
Yep.
And I will often show. I don't know if you saw this picture, Josh, of the Japanese men's World Cup soccer team when they played in Russia in the 2018 World Cup. Right, they cleaned their locker room as if it had never been used before, and left a little placard saying "Spasiba," thank you, in Russian. And their fans were cleaning the stadium after they left. Right, so that's a way of showing some respect for that. And I think we can respect the game itself by doing all of those things. Um, but I think we also respect the game, and you tell me what you think about this, Josh, by sharing your love for tennis with others. So like not saying things like I hate tennis and sort of those negative statements because it's not true. You're just being emotional about it. But talk about how much you like tennis, love it, you're grateful for it. Maybe even try to share it with other people.
Yep.
So I think those aspects of respect are important, but when it comes to the competing part, I think the opponent piece is the most important.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up that point about respecting the game and respecting the sport that you're playing, and how each piece of this, whether it be the opponent, whether it be your teammates or coaches or yourself, parents, and other members of the support staff, but how that all really falls into respecting the game, respecting the sport that you're playing, that you've devoted your time to, and how that can include um, sharing that with other people and sort of passing that on to whether that be the next generation through coaching or through mentorship, or just the people around you, your teammates. So I think that that's a great point. And yeah, I like that breakdown a lot.
Good. So the next thing I have, and I think these are somewhat in a progression, although maybe not, but the next attribute that I think is really important for being a mentally tough competitor in this sport is um, love of learning. That you have to be a student of the game. In fact, you have to be able to put yourself in the position of being a student. And that, there are mentors out there, there are coaches, there's the game that itself that you can learn from. And I think if we even look at our own tennis careers in a less egotistical manner, detach ourselves a little bit from it, and look at it more as a project, whether it's like a science project or some other sort of project, and you're simply working on it. You're simply trying to make it a little bit better. Maybe you look at it as a piece of art and you're just trying to make it more beautiful. However, you want to conceptualize that, can you look at it as a project? And part of the project is you learning more and more about the game. That can be on the technical side, tactical, strategy, the mental, the emotional components, all the physical energy aspects that go into the game, learning more about equipment, right? Simply being a student of the game can help raise your level. Even, and when I think about equipment, just think about like string. Lots of players don't necessarily pay attention to their string. I mean, a lot do, of course, but string can really make a huge difference in performance of play. So we want to, I think, be a student, and I think when we're talking about in a match, we've also got to be a student in terms of can we be good problem solvers?
Yep.
Because I think it's a huge part of it. So what are you learning in a match? You might be observing your opponent, observing the patterns that your opponent is playing, or if you're playing doubles, what is their strategy? How are they making you uncomfortable? And then understanding some of that stuff and then making some adjustments. So I think when we come to the practice court, we've got to want to learn. When we even come to a competitive situation, we have to look at it as a learning opportunity. I think, in a previous episode that we had with Jorge Capistani, he talked about competition as like being quizzes or tests that you might experience, through a semester in school. And that each quiz or test gives you a better sense of where you are right now as a student. And that's I think a really great way to look at it. And then that doesn't get us so caught up in the ego or so caught up in just like, I have to do great in this one tournament. It's about your career in general, about your project as a tennis player. So, what are your thoughts on that, Josh?
I like that a lot. I think in terms of being a constant learner, I think there's a lot of ways to do that. You mentioned a number of them. For me, for especially with younger players, I think, and for all players really, but I think you see it more with with adults. Maybe with juniors, at times you don't see it as much, but really following following and watching and learning from the professional level of the sport.
Yeah.
Being able to watch the best players in the game, and in terms of everything, in terms of how they compete, in terms of what do their strokes look like, in terms of their tactics, in terms of how do they behave, and maybe they're not always the best example at times, at moments, but being able to watch and learn from them and emulate them to a certain extent. I think that's a big one. I think learning from books. I think there's, in the year 2021, there are so many great resources out there. Learning from books, from videos, but yeah, being a true student of the game. I like that you brought up the equipment piece as well, whether that be strings or rackets. Um, I think thinking of each aspect of your performance, and constantly thinking about hey, what could I be doing a little bit more here? Am I really putting in the thought in terms of my equipment? Am I really putting in the thought in terms of my hydration and nutrition that I could
Right.
be? Are there certain areas that and being able to take a critical look at yourself and say, are there certain areas where I'm falling short, where I'm not doing everything in terms of giving myself the best chance, or even learning enough about the topic? Maybe your nutrition isn't up to a level where it could be because you simply haven't learned enough about it, or you haven't spent enough time really thinking it through or talking about it, or finding out what option works best for you. So I think truly learning and engaging with each of these different areas of the sport is a really important point.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there, Josh. It's really just about once you learn those things, just go for 1% improvements. There's
Yep.
some great articles written about the Great Britain cycling team,
Yes.
how they pursued right at they had this effort about only like 1% improvements, and they looked at all areas of their process, and they weren't a particularly good cycling team, but now they have become one of the more dominant cycling teams by simply treating this as, in a way, a project and learning more about it and just making 1% improvements where they could. Right. So, yeah, to me, that's a big part of being a mentally tough competitor in tennis. The next thing I'll bring up, so kind of coming to the second to last, is I think focus is an extremely important part of being a mentally tough competitor. And I think we can break down focus into probably two dimensions, maybe more. I mean, yeah, there are more, but I'll break it into these two. One being more focused on the present moment, and being focused on what you can control. There's certainly, if we get it academic, we could look at internal, external, broad, and narrow. I don't think that is totally necessary here. But I think if, when we look at being focused in the present, this is why, people like you and me and other coaches talk about having an in-between point routine so that you can be, 100% focused on what you're going to do in the present moment, in the next point. And a big part of that is understanding the things that you can control, whether they're on the court, what's going on out there. You can't control the wind, the heat, the sun. You can't control what your opponent is doing. But you can control how you react to all of those things. You can control your attitude toward those things. You can control your actions, your body language, how you breathe. And this is, I think, when we talk about focus, this is sort of the beauty of that mantra of keep expectations low and standards high. Standards is all about the stuff that you can control. And if you can bring excellence to all of those little things, that's really where winning starts. Good performance starts by you paying attention to those little things that you can control. And then, what's something that we can control? We can control what we do between points. And we have those types of routines between points because we know that they facilitate excellent focus on the moment. So they kind of work hand in hand. I think it's a little bit cyclical. We're focusing on what we can control. We do a routine, keeps us in the present moment, which also helps us to focus better on what we can control.
Yep.
Right. And then we go from there. So I think, having maybe this also goes back to love of learning, Josh, is by understanding the process of performance better, learning more about it. We probably are better able to focus because we understand the things that, we can tweak and the things that are actually out of our control. So I think that the ability to be fully focused, fully in the moment, and understanding what you can control is really important, especially during a difficult match.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to break it down, and different from how focus is often broken down into, as you said, the internal and the external. But thinking about that present moment, that mindfulness piece that we've talked
Yeah.
about before the show, but also focusing on those things within your control and not getting distracted by all these other variables. That bad call or that call that you think is a bad call from the previous game on Deuce Point, or the wind, or those thoughts that they keep coming back in your mind, or whatever it may be, and being disciplined enough to keep coming back to, hey, what can I control? Or being disciplined enough to keep coming back to that present moment and not thinking about the past or thinking about the what ifs of the future, but those two big pieces in terms of what can I control, is what is within my abilities right now to influence within this match, within this competition, and am I keeping all my attention on the now, not what's happened or what might happen. So I think that breakdown is helpful for competitors in terms of thinking about where they're placing their focus and being aware of where that focus is. Is it within one of these two areas? Is it being upset about the lineup in a team competition, or why am I playing doubles with this person, or whatever it might be. Why is why is it so windy today? I can't play in the wind. That sort of thing. But instead, let's focus on those things that we can do, give us the best chance to win, and let's really try to hone in on this moment and this point. So I think that's a great breakdown.
And if we go back to Jorge Capistani, this is really that win thing, right? What's important
Yeah.
now? And I don't remember where I read this. Maybe you remember this, Josh. But there was a similar concept that Pat Summitt, the legendary women's basketball coach at the University of Tennessee, she used to have this red whistle. I think maybe it was orange because Tennessee's orange. And whenever she would blow it, she would point at somebody. And the question
Yep.
they had to answer is, "What's important now?" And
Right.
they had to have the right answer. And so that's it's an interesting way of training players' awareness, is to ask them in a big moment, okay, what's important now? And some of the things that you were just mentioning aren't important. Like what the opponent is doing, or what happened 2 games ago, or last point, or the weather. None of that's important. And
Yep.
so I think that's a good way of breaking down focus. All right, so my last blended piece here of our model of mental toughness and different attributes is, I'm going to say that I think you need to have a blend, a healthy blend of humility and sort of unshakable self belief. Um, and they may come in at different contexts, right? So humility meaning, being humble, not being arrogant. So I think you have to be humble enough to learn, right? If we go back to love of learning, I think you have to be humble enough to not think you're better than other people, which may also come into our respect category a little bit. You have to be humble enough to give your opponents credit for when they play well. It's not about making excuses. So I think big thing about humility and being humble is not being egotistical about this process. And that you're, from even from a coaching standpoint, you're willing to be the student. You're willing to put yourself under someone. But when it comes to, going out and actually performing in a match, humility might not be exactly what we need while we're playing. We need this self-belief. Now that is a little bit about ourselves. We need this piece that says, I can win, not I will win, not I deserve to win or I should win, but I have the ability to win. Like I have the, probably would call it in sports psychology, self-efficacy. I believe I can win.
Yep.
No matter the situation, right? 6050 down. You still want to believe you can win. Still believe you're in it, and technically from the way tennis is scored, you are. Certainly some of the people listening, they may be playing matches which have time constraints, and therefore that's a whole different thing. If you're down 6050 and there's 10 minutes left, you don't have a chance of winning. So, but under normal match circumstances, you're still. And so when we have that self belief, hopefully that's also leading to this maybe almost like super confidence that you can play your best under pressure, that you trust your game. And now this might sound a little bit like I'm contradicting here, but part of that study on the attributes of mental toughness, when unshakable self-belief was discussed, there was on the part of the most elite athletes this feeling that I am better than my opponent, like that I can win, I can beat him. And Djokovic actually said this in a press conference he did after the Wimbledon final when he beat Federer in 5 sets. And that was the match where Federer actually won more points than Djokovic. But Djokovic was essentially talking to himself in that fifth set. And one of the things he said is he was reminding himself that he deserved to be there and that he was better than the other guy. So in a way, it sounds like it's a little bit of arrogance, but I think the way he translated it was, I have the ability to win this match. So like a lot of things in mental toughness and mental skills, there's this sort of very fine line. Sometimes there are little contradictions that we have to navigate here. And that's why I think we have to have the right blend of being humble to, having this really unshakable self-belief, but not letting it descend into lack of respect and arrogance. So it's a tough one to maneuver around, I think, in some ways, but important to understand the differences between the two.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely like that. I think there's a fine line between cockiness and confidence at times.
Yeah.
But I think really the difference is confidence is um, being having belief in your own abilities, and I think that is a good point, that you do want to have the belief that you are capable of outperforming the other player. But where the cockiness can come in, or that line that we don't want to cross, is saying, is almost that ego piece, is saying that I'm better regardless. This is going to be. I think that's where you start to overlook the opponent.
Yeah.
Sort of that first piece relating to respect, where if when the ego starts to come out, when the cockiness comes out, it's, I should be winning this match, I should be winning this tournament, I should be the number one player in whatever the region, the country, whatever it is. Where that's really that cockiness piece coming out. But I think it's the humbleness and humility to treat everybody with respect, but at the same time, having the self-belief that you are capable of winning any match in any, coming back from any sort of situation that you're in. So I think it's a fine line, and I think it can be challenging to sort of straddle both sides of that.
Yeah.
But
As
no,
you're saying that, Josh, I feel like maybe the difference is in the actions that one takes in those
yeah,
different circumstances, right? So, you the player who's maybe a little too cocky, a little too arrogant, maybe they are feeling that sense of entitlement, right? Where the player who's doing what we're talking about here, even if they're in a difficult situation, what they do is they continue to fight, or they up their fight, their determination, their effort. They don't start to feel sorry for themselves or make excuses or whatever, right? They put it into action,
yep,
and so I think that's the difference. That's how we navigate this. Um, is coming down to doing those right behaviors that enable us to win, and not make it about the ego, make it about the process.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
that's my model. So just to maybe recap, we talked about respect, especially respect for opponents. Talked about love of learning, being a student, focus, present moment, things you can control, and then the sort of continuum and blend of humility and unshakable self belief. So now I know you did your dissertation on this whole thing, Josh. So I'm very interested to hear, about the different attributes of being a mentally tough competitor that you're going to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a little bit of a background for my dissertation from Cal State Long Beach. For my master's, I interviewed 11 head and assistant Division One coaches, tennis coaches, on mental toughness within college tennis, and sort of broke it down into a few different areas in terms of how they define mental toughness, what are some attributes of a mentally tough tennis player, and then some strategies to build mental toughness. And actually, as we were talking about as Brian and I were talking about this episode, I was looking back at this to sort of jog my memory, to sort of help me craft my thoughts in terms of what area to go in. And I really took it from this research, and I break it down into three areas that were common themes from the coaches that were interviewed, as well as really my own experiences as a sports psychology professional and coach. But I sort of had a different perspective, where Brian, your list was more, and we discussed this a little bit more, character traits, where my list was more of attributes, you could say. Um, but really, my first attribute, or that first area, is resiliency, and the ability to really respond and to handle any sort of adversity. Now, we've talked about this on the show before, that in a tennis match, even the best in the world, the number one player, Djokovic, or Ash Barty, or whoever it is, they don't win 90% of points that they play on a given day. They don't win even 75%. They're actually winning just slightly over 50%. They're winning somewhere around 55%, maybe, for the number one player in the world. So on a micro level, in terms of within a match, it is undeniable, and it's guaranteed that you will experience adversity throughout a match. There will be the ups and downs. There will be that time where your serve is broken, or you're fighting off break points. And there will be the ebbs and flows of a match, and the ability to respond to that adversity during a match is critical in terms of being the best competitor that you can be. So on a micro level within a match, that's to me, that's critical. But also at a more macro level, of the course of a season, the course of a year, in the course of a career, there will be adversity that you overcome. Every person experiences their own adversities in life. Every athlete experiences adversities, whether that means an injury that they encounter, whether that means a teammate that they have disagreements with, or a coach that they have disagreements with, or a spell of time where maybe they're going through a slump or having some particularly challenging matches. So the adversity at a larger level, at a more macro level, um, is is bound to happen as well, just as it does in a micro level in a match. So this ability to be resilient and to respond to adversity whenever it is encountered, to me, is a big piece of this mental toughness, and really how being a mentally tough competitor and being really a great competitor, because anybody can compete well when things are going well, when you're having a great day, when things are when things seem to be flowing well, when you're winning points, when you're having a great season. Things can be a little bit easier, but how can you respond when the going gets tough on that day or during that challenging month or season or whatever it may be? Having the ability to respond time and time again to adversity, to those challenging moments, is how I would start to break it down. So that, for me, that first attribute is resiliency. What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, I know. I think that's obviously an important one. Like you said, there's always going to be moments like that in matches. And I think when we talk about training players, I think there are some maybe even lower level behaviors that we can be working on, or maybe not even lower level. Maybe the first one I would say um, is training your perspective.
Yep.
Having a good personal philosophy around the idea that these things will happen. And one of my favorite mindsets for dealing with adversity is the embrace the challenge mindset. So if somebody makes a bad call, that's unfortunate, and we can't change it. But can you just say, all right, fine, I accept it. I'm going to embrace this opportunity as an opportunity to play better. And sort of is really change
Yep.
that adversity into maybe an opportunity to play better. I think also, being resilient and having these types of perspectives gives you an opportunity again to focus on the things that you can control. So as soon as I face a bit of adversity, it's got to be all right, having the right perspective on it, and now doing something within my control to react to it. So I think it kind of fits in nicely with both of those things. So, you know, very important characteristic for sure of mental toughness.
Yeah, and I would agree that thinking about coming back to, hey, what can I do to what is within my control to try to improve this situation, even just a little bit. I'm having a you know tough time this past month or two. What can I do to start to push that ball a little bit forward, to start to improve things? Maybe it has to do with, maybe I want to have that conversation with my coach that I've been putting off, that I've been dreading. Maybe I want to go for a run for the first time in a few months and just start that process of getting back into it again. What is within my control that I can do to start pushing things in the right direction.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think one other thing, Josh, because we've been talking about standards, like
yep,
facing adversity is not an excuse to let your standards slip.
I
So
like
if you
that.
have high standards on your self talk, your body language, your routines, and other aspects of your performance, you don't want to let, the appearance of adversity distract you from keeping your standards high. And in fact, maybe it's just that's how you respond to adversity is by maintaining your high level in your
Yep,
standards.
that's a great point. That is a great point. Um, so that's really that first piece for me, the resiliency and that ability to bounce back and respond. The second piece is more the emotional piece and the ability to manage emotions, really on the court, and the ability to reset. Again, and to me, this is a little bit linked to that first piece in terms of it is inevitable that we will have those ups and downs, those ebbs and flows, but how do we respond in terms of our behavior, in terms of how we manage those emotions? Are we letting them get to us in terms of our self-talk? Are we showing that outwardly through body language that 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 our emotions are getting to us. Maybe there's a call that we disagree with. Are we for the following 10 minutes after that call, are we moping around the court with our head down and slamming balls into the back fence? Or are we able to, put on the demeanor in terms of our body language of, of rising above that? Are we able to not let any of the negativity from that moment slip out and have some sort of outward outburst? We've talked in the past how in team settings, whether that be a USTA team or college or high school, that there are actually moments where your behavior and your inability to manage emotions can actually influence the people around you in terms of the score. So to me, that ability to manage emotions, both positive and negative, and stay even keel and stay focused in that moment, really, and reset when necessary, are really critical to competing at a high level, day in, day out. And to me, that emotional piece and that ability to manage those positive, negative, anxious, doubtful, whatever sorts of emotions you might be experiencing, but being able to handle all of those in stride is that's sort of that second piece to me in terms of being a great competitor, a mentally tough competitor.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that where those emotions come from, though, for different people may be different, right? So some people might just naturally be more emotional in some regards. And then on the other side, maybe not even on the other side, but another dimension of that is might be like what you place importance in during a match, right? So I think, for example, I'll look at my own career. I was an emotional player when I was younger, teenage years into my 20s. Um, and the issue wasn't emotional immaturity. It's like, and the way I figured this out, Josh, is I tried to just, when I was a teenager, just suppress my emotions. That 100% didn't work. I did suppress my emotions, but I also had no fight.
Right.
Didn't care. So what I learned later, and you mentioned the word resetting, that was the key for me. Is that it was sort of twofold. One was I was putting way too much importance in what had just happened, and not enough importance in what was right in front of me. And so my emotions were all tied as reactions, and as opposed to learning to respond to what was going on. And so by shifting what I valued to the present moment
Yep.
from the past, I was able to contain my emotional reactions and to become very calm. And that resetting that you mentioned was really the important piece for me. I had to do it after every point. I had to reset and just forget and just go back to the what's important now. So I feel like, there's in terms of emotional management, there are a lot of different little things that go into each one of us figuring out how we do manage that piece. But it is clearly very important. And you mentioned the college tennis thing. We discussed with Bob Dallas the idea of emotional contagion.
Mm-hmm.
How that's why they do positive response training, because um, they may positive responses may not have necessarily the same sort of effect as negative responses, but they know that negative responses do have a negative effect on neighboring courts. So really important that we learn to not only manage our emotions for ourselves but also for our teammates.
Absolutely. And again, this is I like that you brought up that there are individual differences in terms of some people are more naturally emotional, and some people are less. And it's not about, if somebody is more on the emotional side, it's not about suppressing that. It's more about harnessing that and utilizing that, letting that fuel you in a, I would say, in a controlled way, in a
Or
not letting
productive
that
way, right?
productive way, exactly, not getting out of control, not letting that consume you, but being able to utilize that in terms of your motivation, in terms of your intensity and your effort, rather than losing a big point and having that explosion. Yeah, it's about again using that in a productive way and being able to channel that. I think is really important. So for me, that last piece again, we talked about resilience. We talked about that emotional control and being able to manage emotions. And to me, that last piece is consistency. Being able to consistently perform at a high level and maintain a high level and a high standard of performance. And I sort of think of this in terms of different areas. I think of this in terms of how we practice on a day-to-day basis. Are we bringing that mindset of that 1% improvement to practice today, and each and every day, where we're trying to work on a certain area of our game and get that area just a little bit better. And we've talked before, actually, in our most recent episode before this, but in the past also about deliberate practice, having a training journal, having a training log, really keeping track of our practices and our improvements, having a clear focus and intention for that given day. So I think that consistency and the ability to maintain a high level of performance starts at practice and starts at with, are we doing everything at practice, maximizing our time at practice, in order to give ourselves the best chance to be competing at a high level, and not, there's that famous quote that we play or we compete like we practice. So if we're not taking things seriously, if we're joking around, if we're hitting tweeners and trick shots, nothing wrong with the occasional tweener, but too many during practice, and not going for the types of shots and making the types of decisions that we would want to make in a match, then we can't expect ourselves to magically make the right decisions in a high pressure environment. So to me, that consistency piece really starts with practice. It even includes the types of behaviors and the choices that we make off the court, whether that be nutrition, hydration, sleep, other sorts of mental training that we can do off court, including visualization, mindfulness, things like that, self-talk, affirmations, whatever that may be. And then it's also about when we're out on court competing during that match, are we utilizing the mental skills that we've developed? To me, it's inevitable that there will be days where you feel better or play better than others. But to me, a big reason for utilizing mental skills is to lessen the difference between those bad days, those days where you're not feeling it, and those better days, those good days where you are feeling good. To me, it's lessening that gap between those better days and those worst days, because even on the worst days, you have the tools, the skill set to help pull you out of there, to help bring you out of those moments. Maybe it's self-talk in certain moments of a match. Maybe it is having a certain routine that you come back to, point in and point out, or even during a changeover. But having the tools that, hey, if I woke up on the wrong side of the bed and everything's not going well in this very moment, I have some skills and I have some tools that are at my disposal that I can utilize right now. I'm not helpless out here without any sort of resources or any sort of tools that I can utilize. But I've been training these. I've been working with a sports psychology professional. I've been talking to my coach. I have a game plan here where I have thought about these scenarios. I'm down 5-2 in the second set. Okay, what can I do here? Is it a matter of changing up my game plan, my playing style? Is it a matter of simply more intensity? Maybe I'm not moving my feet enough. I think there's definitely an awareness piece of being aware enough to notice what's going on or what maybe is going wrong in terms of making the adjustment. But I think to me that last piece of the consistency, other than what's done in practice, other than what's done off court, is when you're actually competing, being able to utilize those mental skills that have been trained and have been practiced, and being able to draw from them during competition, being aware enough to know and recognize what is needed, and then being able to utilize them and implement them in the moment.
I think consistency speaks to the necessity of routines,
Mm-hmm.
rituals, habits, having systems, that you're not just winging it
Yep.
every day. Um, that let's say you're an elite athlete. You don't wake up at say 7 in the morning and wonder, okay, I wonder what I'm doing today. You know, what is going to happen, and I think this is one of the reasons why we why players often will seek out mental training, or one of the sort of selling points of mental skills training is that it can help bring more consistency to your performances through the introduction of different systems, different routines, different habits, so that you can have more structured days, more structured practices. And even though maybe more structure sounds like a freedom inhibiting type of thing, it actually will end up giving you more freedom of time, freedom of, you're not having to go out and now plan every day as if it's a new day. You know
Right.
exactly what you're going to do. It will give you more mental space to be able to do what you need to do because you can just follow your routines and your habits and your systems. So I think once you start to introduce that level of consistency to your days and how you practice and then how you compete, very important. And you could even, Josh, take it down into a match level. Certainly, being consistent as a tennis player, making fewer mistakes is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Having a higher first serve percentage is obviously a good thing. Making more returns. So even consistency when we talk about it at that level, we're not saying everybody should be a pusher. You can still be aggressive, but be consistent in your rate of execution.
Yep.
So if you're an aggressive player who makes 1 out of 10 shots, that's not very good. But if you're an aggressive player who say makes 7 out of 10, okay, that's probably a level of consistency that's good enough for high performance. So I think it's a really important concept. Um, the question then becomes, all right, how do I begin to introduce consistency almost as a lifestyle in order to become a better, mentally tougher competitor?
Right, right. I'm glad you brought up consistency really as a tennis player in terms of your strokes. That if you look, if you break down a match, um, the vast majority of the time, players do have, at least at the non-professional level, players do have more errors than winners. And being able to not beat yourself and not hit yourself off the court by making too many errors. And then again, we're not saying that not to go for your shots or not to play aggressive, but to be aware that you are playing in a consistent manner. You're not hitting too many double faults. You're not making too many errors, and lacking that consistency that is needed um, to keep the point going long enough to win it. So I think that's a great point. But also thinking about the daily habits and routines and being consistent in those. Maybe that has to do with when you wake up or when you go to bed. And some of these smaller details really leads to the types of consistency um, within your mindset and within your game that is going to lead to you playing at a higher level day in day out.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so just to recap a little bit, my breakdown, and again, this is largely based on my dissertation, but really that first piece is the resiliency piece, being able to respond to any sort of adversity that you encounter. Second piece is the ability to manage emotions, and ultimately reset and handle those emotions in stride. And then the last piece is the ability to consistently maintain a high level of performance.
So I think our two models are rather compatible.
Hmm.
I think as we went through yours, there were aspects of, maybe lower levels of mine, kind of figuring into to being successful with those three attributes that you identified. So I think really, if we put it all together, we have a fairly good and hopefully comprehensive model of what, being a mentally tough athlete or competitor in tennis looks like. There's, of course, like I said earlier, there's more. There are more things that go into this, but I think we've given people probably about 7 to 8 different things to focus on that are very complementary to each other. That
Yep.
could get people heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in the past that you know action is really the most important thing. That it's great to identify, hey, I have certain strengths, as I'm able to reset and to my emotional management skills maybe are naturally at a higher level than some of my other attributes, or maybe the self confidence piece, that the unshakable self confidence, and that perspective of thinking that you're capable of beating any opponent, and really that you have the ability to play better than any opponent. So maybe it is certain areas where that you're natural, you feel that you're naturally at a higher level at, but it's that taking action in terms of identifying these areas maybe that you are falling short in terms of these different pieces, and also not to me also not neglecting your strengths. I think a lot of people, and we've talked about this in the past, people fall into this trap of constantly working on their weaknesses, constantly trying to bring their weaknesses up to a level where maybe they won't view them as a weakness. But also, what happens then is, and I think Brian, you've made this point before, is then you start to become mediocre. Everything is at a mediocre, sort of middle of the road level. Um, where we want to be building on our strengths. We want to be utilizing those strengths and continue to build on them. So maybe there are certain areas that naturally you're feeling like you're at a higher level with, but the ability to keep working at them, to keep building them and strengthening them as your core attributes, and not neglecting them just because you're already at a higher level with them.
I think you're right about the action piece. That's really, it's great to talk about some of these things at a high level, but how do you actually put it into place?
Mhm.
Especially when you talk about character traits, people may think that they you know, are a certain way, that they are respectful, etc. But if you can take it down to the specific action level, that really demonstrates where it is. So, I guess what I would say is, if people have questions about, you know, how they could begin to take some actions in these different areas that we talked about, for sure, email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com, and we'd be happy to address that. So, well, that's our show for today. Thanks, Josh, for discussing, our shared mental models of mentally tough competitors in tennis. For more on today's show, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions, again, email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the podcast on your podcast platform of choice, which includes YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. We also put up notifications on Instagram that we've got a new episode out. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you again soon in our next episode.